The training location for revolver shooting was arranged in the courtyard of the castle. Including Sylvie, all the witches selected for the reconnaissance team were given a revolver. After spending 2 days familiarizing everyone with the proper shooting stance, Roland proceeded to the live ammunition shooting phase of the training. The witches performed decently during the gun handling exercises, but the shooting exercise didn't go as expected. Especially when the deafening sound of gunfire echoed and the recoil, everyone's first instinct was to cover their ears, leaving Roland with a vacant expression. He then shifted his gaze towards Anna. There, she held the gun in both hands without moving a muscle, continuously pushing the trigger, completely disregarding the recoil and gunpowder smoke. Setting aside accuracy for a moment, just this action alone was executed perfectly. Roland was secretly amazed. Even though it was a large-caliber revolver, which had a strong recoil. How could her arms remain motionless during continuous shooting? Curiosity drove him to approach her from behind, and he saw that 2 clusters of black flames were tightly adhering to the grip, firmly holding it in the air, while Anna merely made a gesture of grasping, not even touching the handgun. Roland could only laugh wryly and loudly declare, "No one is allowed to use their abilities to assist in practice. If they were to encounter enemies with God's punishment stones, they will be in a frenzy." Seeing a group of witches enthusiastically manipulating their weapons, Roland couldn't help but feel deeply moved. Until now, he still remembered the appearance of each witch when he first met them. Anna used to be as thin as a bamboo pole, with lifeless eyes and a perpetually expressionless face. Nightingale always had a trace of gloom between her eyebrows, and her smile had nothing to do with her emotions. It was, in fact, a mask to conceal her own feelings, always wearing a mischievous smile on her lips. And Wendy, who couldn't hide her fatigue behind her gentle voice. Lily, who had accepted her fate and confusion when she threw herself into the future like a solitary leaf, always on guard like a cat. Surviving after oppression, betrayal, and pursuit was a stroke of luck. There was no time to think about where they were heading. But now, they were completely different from the past. The witches exuded a unique charm, their eyes sparkling with vitality. The future was no longer uncertain for them. Besides simply staying alive, they now had the strength to pursue other things, beautiful things that were just as precious as life itself. In the afternoon, it was time for the specially designed high-altitude throwing exercise. The number of witches participating in the drill was reduced by more than half, leaving only Anna, Wendy, and Lightning. In order to fulfill his promise, Roland planned to drop a 250-kilogram bomb directly above the Grey Castle Royal Palace. As the altitude increased, the border town quickly shrank to the size of a fingernail, and the Crimson Water River turned into a gleaming silver ribbon. However, the drop distance of over 1,000 meters meant that hitting the target will be unlikely. To achieve precise targeting, the bomb had to be equipped with a guidance system. And the young girl, Lightning, would be responsible for this task. "Drop the bomb," Roland ordered. Wendy pulled the valve and released the bomb. Anna sealed the release hole with the prepared cover plate and tightened the fixing bracket. These procedures had been practiced repeatedly on land, and the two of them worked together seamlessly. During the descent of the bomb, Lightning fell at the same speed and applied horizontal thrust to it, allowing the bomb to freely change its trajectory, transforming it into a guided missile. When it was close to the target, Lightning pulled the rear mechanism, separating the deceleration parachute from the bomb. The bomb would gain sufficient kinetic energy in the final few hundred meters and penetrate through the roof of the palace. In this way, the substantial drop distance became a guarantee for precise control of the impact point. The remaining task was to continue practicing this process. A week quickly passed, and Roland called Barav, Carter, and Axe to the castle to inform them that he would be leaving the town for 2 days. He instructed them to continue implementing the town's affairs according to the usual plans. However, his words were met with unanimous opposition from the three. Carter hoped to fulfill his duty as the chief knight and guard the prince. Axe requested to form a 100-person squad for protection. Barav argued that according to the municipal government's decree, any order must be reviewed and stamped by the Lord before it could take effect, urging Roland to stay in the castle. Finally, Roland demanded that everyone follow his command. Barav still didn't understand why Roland had to personally take action. After a moment of silence, Roland spoke up, mentioning that it might be about the survival of the Western Territory or even the entire kingdom. When the three asked for specific reasons, Roland shook his head. He reiterated that this trip was a confidential operation and they were not to disclose the information to anyone. In his mind, Roland considered that the headquarters of the demons might be stationed over 200 kilometers away from the Western Territory, and these demons had once destroyed the holy city of Takira. Revealing such information would be too shocking. As a person who had seen countless doomsday movies, Roland isn't too shocked, but for them, accepting such a reality would be difficult. If the news were to leak, it would cause even more trouble. If it triggered panic among the people, it could lead to a mass exodus from the Western Territory. Therefore, it was not the appropriate time to announce. After attending to the municipal matters, Roland and the witches boarded a hot air balloon and ascended from the castle courtyard, flying towards the direction of the mountains. Since learning about the existence of demons, Sylvie had been burdened with heavy thoughts. She wanted to know if the church, which had fought against the demons 400 years ago, was truly good or bad. Before Roland could speak, Nightingale preemptively responded, stating that the church was definitely bad. Kind-hearted people wouldn't arbitrarily hunt down witches. However, Sylvie continued to stare directly at Roland, as if wanting to hear his answer. Roland contemplated for a moment and said that it was still uncertain whether the church was truly fighting against the demons. If they had made such significant sacrifices, why would they conceal the information and destroy all past records? Spreading this matter widely would be the best way to expand their followers. They still didn't have a complete understanding of many pieces of information, and the distinction between good and bad wasn't so simple. Roland was well aware that Sylvie was actually asking whether he would stand with the church in order to fight against the demons. Sylvie opened her mouth, but didn't deny anything. Roland spoke seriously, stating that the authority of the church and the monarchy were inherently incompatible. Even without the witches, he would not stand on the side of the church. Moreover, now he had everyone by his side. Nightingale smiled proudly. The other witches also expressed their trust in Roland, saying that he was reliable. Sylvie nodded gently, and the heaviness between her eyebrows seemed to fade slightly. And so, as dusk descended, the group could vaguely see the outline of the snow-capped mountains. They selected a camping site on a mountain ridge closer to the sea, allowing them to easily observe their surroundings. It was also far away from the forest, ensuring that wild beasts couldn't easily approach the camp. Everyone began setting up their tents, but due to the limited payload capacity of the hot air balloon, they could only bring one large tent. Therefore, Roland displayed a gentleman's spirit and let the witches sleep in the tent while he slept in the basket. Although Wendy and Soraya suggested that they should go to the basket and let Prince Roland sleep in the tent, he refused each one of them. Only Sylvie kept looking at Roland with a vigilant gaze which left him feeling both amused and exasperated. After assigning the night watch, everyone entered the tent. It was at this moment that faint footsteps could be heard from behind. Roland turned around and found that the person approaching was none other than Anna. Anna approached to accompany Roland. She mentioned that although Sylvie didn't express her gratitude, her mood had become much lighter. Anna herself was also pleased with her own choice. She kissed Roland on the cheek and then went back to sleep. Watching her return to the tent, Roland stretched contentedly and yawned. He intended to go back to the basket to sleep. However, as he was about to do so, an invisible pair of hands cupped his face. There was nothing in front of him, yet he could feel the soft touch on his face once again, but this time, it was from the other side. In the early morning hours, everyone packed up their camping gear and set off once again. Roland also noticed a detail: even when sleeping in the wilderness, the witches' appearances remained flawless, while he clearly couldn't achieve the same. Without looking in a mirror, he could guess that his hair was definitely a mess, and in the eyes of everyone, he probably looked disheveled. After half an hour, following Lightning's instructions, they arrived at the designated location. As Lightning had described, a red mist shrouded the area behind the mountains. The mist pressed down heavily, and the closer they got to the ground, the more intense the red it became. Sylvie couldn't see much due to the distance. As the hot air balloon slowly approached the ground, Sylvie finally began to report what she saw. About 10 miles from the seaside, she had discovered a collection of buildings made of black stones, forming a triangular shape resembling spires. Most of the spires were empty, but some appeared to be filled with liquid. Sylvie froze for a moment. She saw hundreds of pairs of eyes suddenly opened. Sylvie shouted, "The demons have spotted us!" Upon hearing this, Roland gave the order, "Windy, retreat at full speed." Strong winds quickly blew, and the sudden movement of the hot air balloon caused the basket to tilt. However, Sylvie's warning chilled everyone's hearts. 2 demons were flying towards them on their mounts. These creatures could fly, and it didn't take long for Roland to spot 2 black dots in his field of vision. Looking through his telescope, he saw the mounts beneath them with their sharp-toothed beaks, hairless bodies that bore no resemblance to birds. If he wasn't mistaken, these were 2 hybrid demonic beasts. Roland realized his carelessness. He hadn't expected the demons to have flying mounts, and the situation with Lightning was dire. She wouldn't be able to engage in combat like this. If they were shot down from this height, they would undoubtedly meet their demise. The demons were getting closer to the hot air balloon, and Roland could already see the 2 demons approaching. One demon raised its spear. Just as Sylvie issued a warning, Anna had already extended her hands, controlling the black flames to unfold into a thin curtain, shielding the basket. She successfully blocked the incoming attack. The previous block had consumed a considerable amount of her magic. The 2 demons surrounded the hot air balloon from the left and right, and Anna alone defended against one of them. The other witches immediately picked up their pistols and started counterattacking. The witches quickly drew their pistols and retaliated. However, with the basket constantly swaying, it was nearly impossible to hit a fast-moving enemy. After 2 rounds of bullets, none hit their targets. At that moment, the arms of the demons raised once again, and this time they chose to attack from both sides. Anna didn't even have time to observe the enemy behind her when she summoned a thin layer of black flames to shield the basket. She could only cover one side, and Roland clearly saw the demon swing its right arm towards Anna, but he couldn't see the trajectory of the spear. Almost instinctively, he pushed Anna away, who was facing away from him. Then his shoulder felt as if it had been struck by a heavy hammer, and he was sent flying backward, colliding with the basket wall. An unbearable pain seemed to tear him apart, followed by a strong dizziness, as if his consciousness was slipping away. Nightingale's heart-wrenching cry was the last sound he heard before losing consciousness. Witnessing Roland being hit, Nightingale felt her chest tighten suddenly. She feared that he would never wake up again. Just the thought of it made it difficult for Nightingale to breathe. She had never felt so helpless before. But it was Anna who first reacted. She crouched down, covering the entire wound with a mass of black flames. Under the flames, white smoke billowed, accompanied by a sizzling sound. When the black flames dissipated, Roland's severed arm was charred black. The trickling blood had stopped. It was an emergency measure Roland had taught everyone in first aid classes. They learned to secure the wound, then quickly go to the medical center and find Manhwa. They had to get back as soon as possible. Nightingale turned her head slowly towards the southeast, where the town located. She urgently shouted to let Lightning protect the balloon's descent. Although the girl's face was pale, she nodded, casting a glance at the unconscious Roland, and then flew out of the basket. The other demon was still attacking the hot air balloon. Nightingale took a deep breath, forcing herself to temporarily set aside the image of Prince Roland being injured. Now only she could fight the demons. Nightingale saw the best opportunity. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and, taking advantage of the hot air balloon, positioned herself directly on top. The demon was charging straight at them at that moment. Nightingale was surprised to discover that there was a vortex of magic energy slowly rotating within the demon's body, and a shining stone embedded in its arm. Just as the demon was about to collide with the hot air balloon, Nightingale leaped out of the mist and appeared behind the demon. The monstrous winged demonic beast suddenly sank under the increased weight on its back. The demon seemed to realize something and abruptly turned around. But it was greeted by the thunderous roar of a 12mm caliber revolver. The bullet tore through the shroud of flames and smoke and blasted a fist-sized hole in the demon's head. Sticky blood splattered everywhere, and a pungent smell of blood filled the air. The enemies convulsed and fell to the ground, while the demonic beast changed its direction, gliding past the hot air balloon from the side. Just as Nightingale was about to turn back towards the top of the balloon, an unexpected incident occurred. The tilting corpse pulled on the reins, causing the mount to suddenly roll to the side, throwing her off. Before she could react, she had already been thrown beyond a safe distance to return on her own. She heard her sisters shouting in panic, but it was all in vain. Lightning was engaged in a battle with the demons, and even if Maisie transformed into an eagle, she couldn't lift herself up. Nightingale was well aware of the imminent outcome she was about to face. Wendy struggled to control the wind direction but was powerless to stop it. Nightingale closed her eyes, and the scene of her encounter with Roland replayed in her mind. She sat on the edge of the bed, toying with the dagger in her hand, waiting for the prince to enter through the door. Everything started to fade away, leaving only the smiling face of the prince. Nightingale had only one regret, perhaps, was that she couldn't accompany him until the end. Suddenly, a series of high-pitched chirps reached her ears. Nightingale opened her eyes and saw a white figure diving straight towards her, landing on her chest. It was Maisie. She was about to say something when a dazzling white light burst forth from the bird's body. Its form instantly expanded, revealing enormous and formidable flesh wings unfurling from its back. Feathers scattered, and the bird's head transformed into a terrifying and fearsome visage, resembling a flying demonic beast. Maisie let out a deafening roar as her claws grabbed Nightingale and threw her upwards. When Maisie carried Nightingale into the battle, the situation instantly reversed. The demons let out an angry roar and was forced to abandon the pursuit of lightning. Instead, it fiercely hurled a spear towards Maisie. Nightingale tapped Maisie twice, and Maisie's body rapidly shrank, transforming back into a bird. The spear whistled past them, plunging into the sea. In the next instant, Nightingale emerged from the mist and returned to Maisie's back, seamlessly evading the attack. Just as they were about to collide, Maisie suddenly descended, brushing past the enemy's shoulder. Once she regained her balance, Nightingale had disappeared from Maisie's back. She reappeared behind the demons like a phantom. With anger in her eyes, she pulled the trigger, and the gunshots resounded continuously. The demon fell into the ocean. The demonic beast, now without its master, was also struck down by lightning with her pistol, falling into the sea and quickly disappearing. The hot air balloon descended slowly. Everyone anxiously looked at Roland. Wendy mentioned that they had been delayed for so long, and the hot air balloon would take a while to reach the town. They now had to proceed with Lightning and Maisie leading the way for His Highness. Maisie's enormous head opened its jaws wide, reassuring everyone that she was fine. Lightning seemed a bit downcast, probably feeling that as an adventurer, she was afraid of fighting the enemy, which led them all into this predicament. She quietly said she was fine as well. Before setting off, Nightingale gently patted her head, telling her that it wasn't her fault. The witches had bound the unconscious prince to Maisie's back, while Lightning carried the severed hand. The two quickly took off, soaring along the crimson water river towards the town. The other witches realized that they needed to leave as soon as possible. The hot air balloon ascended once again, and now only 5 people remained. Soraya was puzzled, wondering why the hot air balloon was spotted, while having sky camouflage and should be difficult to distinguish at a height of 2 kilometers. Sylvie furrowed her brow and explained that there was a gigantic demon with a head even larger than its body, covered in countless eyes. Anna recalled the strangeness of the 2 flying mounts. Their blood was a deep blue color instead of the dark black color from the typical hybrid demonic beasts. Wendy exclaimed how fortunate it was that Maisie could transform into their likeness. If it wasn't for her saving Nightingale, they would all have been in danger. Nightingale, who had been silent all along, suddenly spoke up. She revealed that Maisie's abilities had evolved. The magical energy within her was no longer a swirling vortex but had transformed into a fixed form, a pair of unfurled white wings, expanding gracefully. Lightning held onto the arm of His Highness, feeling overwhelming guilt. The demons may have had a fearsome appearance, but it wasn't overwhelmingly powerful in the air. If she had left the hot air balloon from the beginning to intercept the enemy, His Highness wouldn't have suffered such severe injuries. It was at that moment that Lightning realized how far she still was from being an outstanding adventurer. His Highness's breathing grew weaker, and his body grew colder. They had to move at full speed. By the time they reached the border town, Lightning felt dizzy and disoriented. The excessive speed not only drained her magical energy rapidly but also put a tremendous strain on her body. She gritted her teeth and, using her last ounce of strength, landed directly in front of the castle's courtyard. She shouted towards Carter, who had rushed over with a gun upon hearing the commotion, quickly summoned Miss Manhwa. "The prince is injured." Roland suddenly opened his eyes, finding himself lying on a soft, spacious bed. Above him was a familiar ceiling. He turned his head to look at his shoulders. Both left and right seemed to be intact. Testing his hands, they too appeared to function as normal. Everything felt like a dream, yet he knew it was not. Encounters with the demons and subsequent attack were undeniably real. Being unscathed in his bedroom meant they had successfully escaped the demons' pursuit and safely returned to the castle. He wondered if everyone else returned safely. He propped himself up, a sense of weakness coursing through his body. He was about to call someone when he saw, at the edge of the room, against the wall, a line of witches: Anna, Nightingale, Lightning, Maisie, and Manhwa. They were leaning on each other, their breaths steady, eyes closed, seemingly deep in sleep. Roland quietly stood up and pulled back the curtains. Anna was woke up by the sound, rubbing the sleepiness away. She stepped over to Roland. When Roland asked about the other witches, Anna's voice took a somber tone. She told him everyone was fine except him. Before he could utter another word, Anna hugged him tightly, calling him a fool. Anna's actions woke the other witches. Hearing Anna repeatedly call the prince a fool, they joyously got up and flocked over. Lightning was the next to jump on Roland, followed by Manhwa and Maisie. Nightingale hesitated for a moment but finally decided to join, wrapping everyone into her arms from behind. Thus, they all huddled together, reluctant to let go for a long time. At night, Roland learned about the detailed course of events. The witches had jointly defeated the pursuing demons, while Lightning and Maisie had escorted him back in advance. After receiving treatment from Manhwa, his broken arm swiftly healed, but due to severe blood loss, he had been unconscious for a whole day. This mission had been somewhat unexpected. Even the sky-camouflaged hot air balloon could be spotted by the demons. Despite the significant danger, the acquired intelligence was extremely valuable. The so-called demons were not some messengers of hell, but seemed more like a highly advanced civilization. Nightingale also discovered that magic existed within the demons, but unlike the witches, their magic seemed to rely on certain mechanisms to be activated, like the gem embedded on their arms. Unfortunately, all the demons' bodies had fallen into the sea, so Roland couldn't further verify these theories. Lastly, concerning the red liquid in the stone tower, Roland suspected that the red mist in the sky was formed by the vaporization of this liquid. Perhaps demons not expanding further into the wilderness, or even the four great kingdoms, was due to the limits of the gas's coverage area? Regardless, according to all the information they had, there would be no immediate threat to the border town. At this point, the door to his bedroom opened, and standing in the doorway was Anna, dressed in a white nightgown. She closed the door behind her and bolted it. Then, she took Roland's hand and walked him to the bed. Though she seemed a little nervous, there was no hesitation in her eyes. They both knew what was about to happen. Roland lifted her by the waist and gently placed her on the bed. He found himself growing nervous. Just as he was lost in thought, Anna's soft voice echoed in his ear, asking him if he had considered the possibility of losing his own life when he pushed her away on the hot air balloon. Roland was taken aback, not expecting her to ask such a question. He had just acted instinctively, but Anna insisted that Roland, as the future ruler of Grey Castle and the hope of all witches, should not have risked his life for her. Roland smiled, saying he couldn't stand by and watch her be attacked without doing anything. Even if he had more time to think, he would still have made the same choice. Anna lowered her eyelashes, falling silent for a moment before speaking again. She wanted to know more about Roland's past, to understand him better. Roland thought for a while, and decided not to speak about the past of the fourth prince and the palace, but to share his own true story. He described how he had lived in a city much larger than Grey Castle, how he was a troublemaker in school, and how he had completed all his studies as he grew older. With half-closed eyes, he slowly narrated his embellished past. It had been a long time since he had experienced this sort of unguarded, unrestrained communication. Perhaps it was time for the next step? Turning his head slightly, Roland found that Anna had already closed her eyes, her chest gently rising and falling against his side, peacefully lost in sleep like a kitten. He shook his head and then couldn't help but chuckle. Whispering a goodnight, he too succumbed to the world of dreams. As the morning sunlight seeped through the gaps in the curtains, everyone began to rise from their beds and stretch. Wendy and Sylvie exchanged greetings while preparing for their morning routine with a basin of fresh water. Nightingale rubbed her eyes, seemingly having stayed up late the previous night. Wendy asked her if she had not slept well, to which Nightingale replied that she had many dreams. Sylvie snorted in disbelief. She had clearly seen Nightingale snuck off to the third floor of the castle last night, even standing in front of the Prince Roland's room for quite some time. Just as she was about to comment, Nightingale suddenly turned to stare at her. At her silent warning, Sylvie decided it was best not to be overly curious. Sylvie had gradually come to accept the undergarments that Roland had provided for the witches. She had to admit, Prince Roland was not what she thought to be, but a really great person. Thinking of him now brought a warmth to her heart. She could never expect there were nobles who would willingly risk injury for a witch. Witnessing Roland's selfless act of pushing Anna away had touched something deep within her. The witches of the Witch Union were not mere tools under his control, but his important companions. If Roland could join hands with Tilly, combining their strength, they might truly create a new kingdom where witches and ordinary people can all live in peace. Maisie was showing off her new form in the newly renovated backyard of the castle, twirling around for everyone to see. This brown-feathered giant bird, including its tail, was a full 10 meters long, with a wingspan nearly 15 meters. Its sharp teeth were intimidating, and if it hadn't been for Maisie's newly evolved ability, everyone probably wouldn't have made it back. Nightingale stroked Maisie's smooth neck, saying that she will prepare a bag of charcoal-grilled fish chips for Maisie every day. The giant bird's tail wagged more joyfully. As per usual, it was time to test the new abilities. Maisie took Roland and Nightingale into the sky. The brown-feathered giant bird she had transformed into was even larger than the original version ridden by the demons, and her flight speed was about 80 kilometers per hour, although still much slower compared to lightning, but she can now carry people on her back. Now, the magic power contained within Maisie had greatly increased. Roland extended his arms, experiencing the sensation of riding a dragon. Moreover, through Maisie, Roland confirmed his previous theory: a witch's evolution depends on her understanding of her own abilities. Whether this understanding is acquired through learning or sudden enlightenment, it can both prompt changes in abilities. They soon landed at the new apartment building. After nearly 4 months of construction and renovation, the building was finally ready for use. Each witch had her own private bedroom. Evelyn thought back to the cement that had placed a few months ago during initial phase of the construction. Mixed with stone, it really could form various shapes. Moving into her new room, Evelyn felt a bit anxious. It had been a month since she came to the border town, and aside from tasting wines for His Highness, she hadn't done anything else. In the last test, she ranked last among the witches, scoring only 5 points. Even so, His Highness showed no signs of treating her any differently. Candle, excited, pushed open the bedroom door, inviting Evelyn to see the kitchen. Candle paused, then squatted down to touch her forehead and asked her if everything was all right. After a moment of silence, Evelyn spoke softly. It had been a month since they arrived. Everyone had their own tasks. Lian's construction of the new city walls was almost complete. Honey had trained a large number of flying messengers for His Highness, and Sylvie had accompanied His Highness to investigate those terrifying creatures. Yet she still had nothing to do. She didn't understand why His Highness had chosen her. Candle pondered for a while and suggested Evelyn ask His Highness herself. Evelyn was startled, but Candle reassured her, saying that Prince Roland was a good person. Even Sylvie had changed her previous stance of keeping her distance and being wary of the prince, and began to praise Prince Roland. After some consideration, Evelyn decided to do as Candle suggested, in order not to continue suffering from this insecurity. Roland summoned Barav to his office. He asked Barav to issue a recruitment notice. As much as possible, the workers processing the starch should be female. Roland believed that women were more meticulous in their work and hoped to see more women take up jobs. He also demanded that after the next round of assessments, the town hall under Barav's responsibility must recruit a group of female apprentices. Barav responded that there was no precedent for this, and if it was just about being meticulous, his apprentices were no less competent than any woman. Roland bluntly stated, if there's no precedent, then they'll create one. Roland needed all women to take on the task of building the town and needed to guide people to change their perceptions. After Barav left, Nightingale appeared. When she heard the word starch, she thought Roland was about to cook something delicious. Roland simply explained how to obtain starch. Although starch could make decent ingredients, Roland's focus was not on food. It was a key material for producing explosives. Nitroglycerin had not yet started to be trialed, and conditions for TNT were even more out of reach, so nitrocellulose became the most easily manufactured high explosive. While Roland was thinking about explosions, and Nightingale was contemplating new dishes, meanwhile there came a knock on the office door. The door creaked open, and Roland was surprised to see that it was Evelyn standing outside. She walked to the desk and bowed her head, seeming a little nervous. She wanted to ask a question, and Roland smiled, inviting her to ask anything she wanted. Evelyn, her voice trembling, asked why he had chosen her to come to the border town. Roland was slightly surprised by the question. Evelyn went on to say that her abilities were not outstanding, and that the salary Roland provided was enough to hire a professional brewer in the capital. Roland didn't answer but stood up and asked, "How do you find the taste of those drinks?" Evelyn gave her evaluation of all the alcohol. Roland stood up and opened a cabinet, taking out a jar of wheat beer from the top shelf and placing it in front of Evelyn. He asked her if she could transform this wheat beer into the baijiu he brewed. Evelyn extended her hands, held the jar, and soon the dim yellow liquor inside began to change. As bubbles surged, the beer became clearer and clearer, until it was as transparent as water. Roland tasted it, and it was indeed the taste of high-alcohol liquor. Roland said that this was the reason why he chose Evelyn. Looking at her puzzled face, he explained that he planned to open a brewery, and he wanted Evelyn to be his chief brewer. In the palace hall of Internal Winter City, Garcia Wimbledon, draped in a fur coat, sat on the throne, listening to the appeal and request of a nobleman. The kneeling nobleman hoped Garcia would help him seek justice. His son, a knight who had protected the former queen, had been killed by the church believers. He wished to take his soldiers into the mountains to capture those rebels and avenge his son, and he also hoped Garcia would provide him with snow powder. Garcia knew the powder was her trump card to change the situation on the battlefield, so she could not give it to him. Maybe the nobleman knew Garcia was going to refuse him. Before she could speak, he said that if Garcia agreed to his request, he would return to the court to serve her, and his whole family would fully support her rule over the kingdom of Internal Winter. This made Garcia shocked slightly. The church had executed the queen and wiped out a group of senior officials. She knew this nobleman had a great reputation in the kingdom. If she could gather the remaining nobles through him, she could alleviate the difficulties of administrative operation to a certain extent. She pondered for a moment, and finally made a decision. She would not give the powder directly to him, but she would send people to assist him when he needed it. When the nobleman left, one of Garcia's knights presented a glass of fruit wine and brought a letter from the King of Wolfheart. The letter stated that the church had sent troops again. They were departing towards Wolfheart City and had broken through several temporary defense lines. The knight couldn't believe it. The month of the demons was approaching. Did the church plan to abandon the new holy city? Garcia's face was grave. She hadn't expected the church to act so quickly. If she had few more months after the month of the demons, she would be better prepared. Clearly, the church didn't plan to give her that time. Garcia knew that if she refused the Wolf King's request for help, once the kingdom of Wolfheart fell, she wouldn't last much longer either. However, this was also an opportunity. If she could exhaust and hopefully wipe out the church's army in Wolfheart City, when the demonic beasts invade Hermes on a large scale, the church would face a disaster. She ordered her subordinates to prepare the Black Sail Fleet for the campaign. She planned to spend the winter in Wolfheart City this year. Meanwhile, back in the border town. Upon hearing that the prince planned to drop a giant bomb from a hot air balloon at an altitude of 2,000 meters onto the palace, Carter was somewhat incredulous. Axe, excited, said that if they really could drop the bomb right above Timothy, he would certainly be scared out of his wits. Roland smiled. Suddenly, a white shadow fell straight to the ground, raising a column of smoke and explosion in the test site. The dull landing sound came afterward. After a week of training, Lightning's bomb guiding skills had greatly improved. The test was very successful, and Roland announced that the air raid plan was officially launched. Roland called together the key personnel. The plan would be executed next Monday. Axe would lead a team of 50 musketeers to escort the witches. Roland did not plan to fly there directly in a hot air balloon because it was too far. According to the map, if they departed from Silverlight City, they could complete the bombing in one day and return before sunset. This time, Nightingale and Sylvie would be responsible for monitoring the surroundings of the camp, and the other 4 witches would carry out the airstrike. In the end, Roland urged everyone to pay attention to their safety. He would be waiting for their good news in the border town. May returned to border town once again, standing on the dock looking at the 2 large ships sailing away. 2 young actors wanted to ask questions, but Eileen was helpless and could only find May. The 2 girls looked at May with twinkling eyes, asking about the history of the witch's diary. After May answered their questions, Eileen pulled the 2 girls away, asking them to pack their bags and prepare to disembark. Eileen stood next to May, thanking her for bringing the girls who hadn't finished their drama class to border town. Even though Prince Roland didn't have high requirements for drama, Eileen feared that His Highness wouldn't accept them. May, however, said that she didn't plan for all of them to become actresses. Although these girls were still far from being ready for a stage performance, they could understand the scripts and could read and write, which was exactly what His Highness needed. May further explained that the prince was promoting drama not because of his own preferences, but with the intention of using it to promote positivism to the public. Excited, Eileen flung herself into May's arms, looking at her with admiration. Soon they arrived at the dock of border town. Eileen jumped off the ship and hugged Ferlin tightly. Ferlin thanked May for protecting Eileen during the theater conflict. Seeing the 2 of them acting sweetly with each other, May pursed her lips, shouldered her luggage alone, and headed for the residential area. The familiar figure she was expecting did not appear, even though he had solemnly promised in the letter to give her a surprise. Although the luggage was not heavy, she felt somewhat disappointed. Back home, May put down her package. She knew that the man she was thinking of was an important figure next to His Highness, and could not move around as freely as ordinary people. A long-lost sense of relaxation hit her. She let out a long sigh and took out some wine from the cabinet, just about to have a drink when there was a knock at the door. Standing outside was none other than Carter. He wiped the sweat off his forehead, having not expected the boat to arrive an hour early. When he heard that she had arrived, he had rushed over from the military camp. He apologized for his tardiness. Oddly enough, Despite not seeing him at the dock and despite him not being there to greet her, seeing Carter now, May's mood instantly lifted. May invited Carter to have a drink, but he politely declined because he still had tasks to complete. The chief knight took out a small red wooden box from his pocket and handed it to her. May thought it was a new product from the market and opened the lid, only to see a golden ring standing quietly at the bottom of the box. At the top of it was a sparkling clear gemstone. Carter knelt on one knee and asked May, "Will you marry me?" The witches in the First Army had been on the road for 4 days now. According to the plan, they should arrive at the outskirts of Silver Light City by tomorrow afternoon. With the help of the flying messengers controlled by Honey, Roland could receive letters from the team every day. In the absence of Nightingale, Chief Knight Carter took over the responsibility of guarding the castle and the prince. However, what puzzled Roland was that Carter seemed to be in a very good mood these days, as if he had encountered something particularly happy. Was it that delightful to return to his original job of guarding him personally? Seeing the rapid progress of Border Town's construction projects in recent months, Roland was delighted. Suddenly, Kyle rushed into the office, excitedly declaring that he had successfully developed the large-scale acid-making method. Roland stood up in excitement, asking Kyle to take him to see. They arrived at the laboratory by the Crimson Water River, where a very young-looking man bowed to Roland. Roland recognized him as Charles, whom Kyle often mentioned. Charles led Roland to several gray and white tanks and a furnace. Each tank was about 4 meters high, with pipes connected at the top. Kyle explained the operation and results, and Roland excitedly patted the lead tank, asking about the production output. Charles picked up his notebook and said that the daily output was about the same as a week's amount from the laboratory's distillation method, and it could be further increased with larger tanks. Roland was delighted, instructing Charles and Kyle to construct larger-scale devices in a few days. If there wasn't enough lead, they could substitute it with iron. Psoriasis coating could protect the iron from acid corrosion. Kyle nodded in agreement, but his next words froze Roland's smile on his face. Now that there were significant results with the large-scale acid-making method, and the 5 laboratories were all filled with apprentices, could he finally receive the promised intermediate chemistry book from His Highness? Scroll was tidying up the books on Roland's shelf, the autumn sun shining on Roland's back through the window. The prince would occasionally jot down a few lines on paper, then began to ponder with his hand on his forehead, while saying some words incomprehensible. Scroll sighed softly, regretting that she couldn't help him. Among the witches, perhaps only Anna could assist him in this regard. The prince had written several pages earlier, and Scroll had committed them all to memory, but that was all she could do. This knowledge was far more advanced than the mathematics and other subjects she had encountered before. Seeing the prince's headache, Scroll suggested he should rest for the day. Roland dropped the pen as if surrendering, leaning back in his chair and exhaling. He envied Scroll's perfect memory. Scroll smiled and said that it wasn't always good to remember everything. For example, bad experiences, sadness, and sorrow were better forgotten for one's happiness. Recalling Scroll's past, Roland probably guessed what she was thinking and showed a sorry smile while saying she is right. This sent a warm sensation through Scroll's heart. Rarely did anyone care about a witch's feelings, let alone when that person was a member of the royal family. Prince Roland was completely different from all the other nobles she had ever met. He had profound knowledge, yet he spent his days trying to teach it to others. He was of noble status but did not display an exclusive attitude. He had the admiration of the people and could do whatever he wanted. But not only did he not do so, he took care of others' feelings. Now, Scroll found her thoughts were gradually changing. In the past, she didn't agree with the prince marrying a witch, but at this moment, she felt that no matter who the prince marries, nothing would stop him from ascends to the throne of Grey Castle. He relied not on the conventional, power-hungry nobles, but on the people who supported him because he brought them a better life. Roland rubbed his head. This was the last page. He planned to hand it over to Kyle like this, along with a physics textbook. That should be enough for him to study for a while. Roland pulled out a new piece of paper and quickly wrote down a few words after all, it's a book from the ancient times. Missing a large part is quite normal, right? Scroll stepped out of the office, her attention drawn by the splendid view of the back garden. Leaf, using her ability, had filled the backyard with a variety of plants. The garden was filled with plants that Leaf had improved, various fruit trees and crops, as well as dozens of bird nests where the messenger birds raised by honey slept. Scroll had always thought that Leaf could be the first witch with an evolved ability. Leaf recalled the prince saying that evolution originated from understanding one's own abilities. She could sense that evolution was not far from her. Her eyes sparkled with a bright light. Animals are life, plants are also life, even the cells that make them up are life. Looking at this garden, she felt that she had found her direction forward. Under the watchful eye of Sylvie, the team moved in such a way to avoid all scrutiny, not attracting anyone's attention from start to finish. Once the camp was set up, the following day, the hot air balloon was slowly ascending, commencing its mission of the airstrike. Anna leaned over the edge of the basket and asked Lightning if she was tired. Lightning shook her head, saying she could fly for an entire day. Wendy also moved closer, telling her to not feel too tense. Lightning saying she had practiced many times and the palace was so big that she couldn't possibly miss. Wendy smiled, advising Lightning not to overdo it and reminding her that His Highness had emphasized that her safety was most important. Wendy gently told Lightning that what happened during the scout wasn't her fault. Everyone could see Lightning's dejection over the past few days. Not everyone was adept at fighting. Anna also consoled her, asking her to rest for a while. Seeing both of them say so, Lightning gave a soft hum through her nose and flew into the basket with her head drooping. After a morning's flight, Maisie flapped her wings back to the hot air balloon, reporting to the three that the inner city of the royal capital was already in sight. The royal capital was not unfamiliar to the witches of the Witch Union, who had once hidden in the slums of this city for several months. Compared to other cities, the capital was very harsh in its pursuit of witches. Almost every month, witches were executed in the tiered plaza of the outer city district. Wendy manipulated the air currents, keeping the basket steadily suspended above the royal capital. Everyone was well practiced in the next steps. As the bomb descended, Lightning quickly caught up with the bomb, beginning to adjust its trajectory bit by bit. She had no affection for this bustling capital, and if she could drop the bomb right above Timothy, ending his life, she would be more than willing to do so. If Roland were to rule the kingdom of Grey Castle, all of these tragedies could have been avoided. The wind whistled in her ears, the view on the ground expanded, and the details of the palace and the inner city gradually revealed themselves before Lightning. As the altitude plummeted, the parachute quickly reached its release point. Lightning pulled the mechanism, allowing the parachute to detach from the bomb, while at the same time, she embraced it and climbed upward rapidly. Before leaving, His Highness repeatedly instructed that she must ascend to a sufficiently high safety position before the bomb hits the ground, and never look back at the explosion. However, the little girl couldn't resist her curiosity. A dazzling flash of light ignited at the top of the palace and quickly expanded. The incandescent light turned into bright orange-red, then disappeared into the rolling smoke. This process lasted less than a minute, and the entire royal capital could hear the explosion. The knights hurriedly led Timothy to the basement. Along the way, Timothy saw shattered glass filling the corridors. Through the broken windows, the dome of the castle on one side was no longer there. In the continually rising smoke and dust, only a few solitary stone pillars remained of this magnificent building. Timothy knew that what had just happened was definitely not an earthquake but the effect of a large amount of snow powder exploding. He couldn't believe that his younger brother also had such a weapon. He didn't know how Roland managed to bury the snow powder in the palace. As soon as he stepped into the basement, Timothy grabbed the collar of a nearby knight, instructing him to thoroughly search the entire palace area. All suspicious persons, regardless of whether they were nobles, attendants or servants, needed to be thoroughly investigated. After the knight left, Timothy realized that his back was soaked with cold sweat. Roland had actually managed to do it. Your position is not as safe as you imagined, and everyone will see that your throne is already tottering. Thinking of this warning, Timothy couldn't help but shiver. As his anger gradually subsided, he felt fear rising from his feet. He fiercely punched the broken wall. Roland received a secret message from the royal capital. The letter was written by Tassa for Roland and was delivered by the flying messenger. The letter stated that the palace was quickly sealed off, and everyone was prohibited from entering or leaving, so he was unable to know the situation inside the palace. By evening, all the residents knew about the attack on the palace, and everyone was discussing this matter. Coupled with Roland's previous warning, many people even thought that Timothy had already died. The major nobles outside the royal capital showed no movement, and the response from the palace side was also very swift. Tassa believed that Timothy had not died. Tassa informed Roland that he would use this attack to portray it as divine punishment for Timothy's tyrannical acts. Tassa have already collected evidences of Timothy's brutal actions and will start to spread over the next few days and distribute it by the rats. Soon the entire royal capital would know about this. After reading, Roland folded the secret letter and put it into the drawer, letting out a long sigh. If this attack could truly deter Timothy from sending troops, that would be great. The next thing to do is to wait patiently for the witches to return. Just then, Carter pushed open the door of the office. He reported that 2 fleets had arrived at the dock, one being the Margaret merchant fleet and the other being the envoy group Roland had sent to the southern border to recruit refugees. They brought 500 refugees who were undergoing quarantine procedures. Kyle put down the book, repeatedly saying, "So that's how it is." Charles worriedly noted that Kyle hadn't slept all night. Ever since Kyle got this intermediate chemistry book, Kyle hadn't slept for 2 days, practically staying up all night to read through the entire ancient book. He had glanced at it a few times, but the content was too profound and difficult to understand. The chief alchemist's voice showed no signs of fatigue but was rather spirited. He discovered that he knew nothing about this world. He had always thought that alchemy was just alchemy, and everything else had nothing to do with them. But he was wrong. The book from the very beginning tries to link everything together. Everything is composed of the same substance and operates under the same rules. Even the rise and fall of the sun, the blooming and falling of flowers are the same. This rule is so precise that as long as the initial conditions are the same, the results will be exactly the same. Chemistry is just a small part of it. Charles couldn't believe what he heard. This completely overturned his previous understanding. These theories are too elusive and cannot be verified by the naked eye. Kyle also finds it hard to answer the questions raised by Charles, but His Highness have definitely opened up a new door to the truth of the world. He hopes that in the future, he can understand these 2 books on physics and biology as well. Maine stood on an arched hillside, gazing at the city in the distance. Wolf Heart City was already broken and battered, with local black boulders filling the damaged areas. Unrepaired areas were covered with wooden frames and shields. A bishop reported that the siege beasts were ready, to which Maine nodded with satisfaction, asking him to wait for the signal to attack. He need to go and talk to the pure ones under the Pope's command. Thinking of the 2 witches, he couldn't help but frown. They were unlike the other witches raised by the church, maintaining their own way even in the midst of marches and battles. In the middle of the plain stood 2 women and 3 prisoners kneeling on the ground. One of the witches had long white hair and her robe fluttered with the wind, like a flawless elf. The other woman had an enviable figure and golden curls, occasionally bursting into a clear and pleasant laugh. Maine ordered everyone to leave, but the 2 witches didn't understand why he had driven the audience away. Maine explained that they would soon launch a full-scale attack on Wolf Heart City, and that interrogating the prisoner at this time was pointless. He hoped that they would quickly move to the front line as well. Isabella shrugged and said she couldn't stop Zero, who enjoyed playing the judgment game the most, and wanted Maine to be a spectator for once. Maine maintained a poker face, but he was secretly annoyed. Calling it a judgment game was a euphemism. It was more like a cat-mouse game. The prisoner had to escape from the area set by the witches or defeat them to stand a chance of survival. A long sword and a light crossbow were placed in front of the prisoner. He picked up the crossbow from the ground and shot at Zero. Regardless of whether he hit her or not, his other hand had already grabbed the long sword, and he swung it forward. But the blade didn't hit anything. When he looked up, he was stunned. The bolt from his crossbow was caught in Zero's mouth. The prisoner's eyes widened, and his hands trembled slightly. In the next second, those seemingly delicate hands grabbed the prisoner's head. With a gentle pull that used his forward momentum against him, a light crack was heard. Then the prisoner fell to the ground. She turned her head, looking at the remaining two. Seeing this, one of the other prisoners turned and ran, which seemed to disappoint Zero. She turned into a wisp of ghostly light and rushed into the prisoner's body. He immediately stopped in his tracks, his eyes rolling back, and his body underwent a strange transformation. A dim light burst from within him, his body contorted and deformed. Zero then returned to the last prisoner. He was the youngest of the spies caught, his somewhat immature eyes full of shock and fear, seemingly unable to believe what had just happened. What shocked him most was that Zero knew his name, his identity, and how he had been recruited into the scout team. Zero lifted his head, telling him that he no longer has a home to return. His family are all gone. The boy opened his mouth, but he couldn't say a word. Zero continued to speak, telling him his father had fallen to death while repairing the city wall and his mother had been punished by whips when she tried to condemn the overseers. The young boy couldn't help but widen his eyes, his face showing an uncontrollable sadness. He fell to his knees, sobbing, asking her what he should do. "Follow your heart, only the gods can judge," Zero gently said. The boy knelt down saying he was willing to tell them everything he knew, as long as they could save his mother. Zero patted his head, took out a plant with long slender leaves from her pocket, and handed it to him. The boy swallowed it directly. Maine knew that for ordinary people this was a highly toxic poison. Not long after the boy swallowed it, his face turned a sickly pallor. He clutched at his throat, making rasping sounds. His nails quickly tore through his skin, splattering blood on his neck. After a few minutes of suffering, his body gradually softened, and he stopped breathing. Maine asked in a deep voice why she had tricked him into taking the poison. They could have gained a devout church believer. She shrugged her shoulders, revealing that what she had said were all lies. She had no idea of the true situation of his family. Maine, growing impatient, turned his head and told them to prepare for the attack. Both witches were very confident, the Wolf King and Garcia were sure to die. The sound of the attack horn rolled across the sky, and amid the towering dark clouds and autumn wind, the second siege began. The siege beasts, machines designed to launch massive iron spears, burst into a magical glow. When the light was as bright as the sun, the massive iron spear, engulfed with magical flames, exploded in an ear-splitting roar, shooting out at a speed difficult for the naked eye to follow, straight towards the city walls. Just then, a thunderous noise came from behind the walls. The frantic sound of the horn blew again, and the mixed force of the Judgment Army and the Punishment Army began their charge towards the walls. Now, the defenders of the Wolf Heart City had to contend with these warriors who were not of this world, using nothing but their flesh and blood. Thinking back on Maine's expression, Isabella voiced her concern. Maine is set to become the next pope, and he may not be pleased with what Zero has done. Zero, however, was unconcerned. Once Maine reaches the top floor of the library, he'll understand. This is the way to please the gods. Isabella didn't quite understand, but Zero continued, the current pope's life is nearing its end. He confided this to her himself, even planning to let Zero consume him before he dies. Isabella protested, but Zero reassured her, she knew what she can and can't do. Isabella sighed, realizing that Zero was a weird person, probably because of her unique power. After consuming so many people, there were hardly any experiences left in the world that were new to her. Thus, Zero rarely took an interest in anything. Everything she did was for her own amusement, and it had to be an unusual form of entertainment. Isabella shifted her gaze back to the battlefield. A fierce fire suddenly burst out beneath the city gate, separating the Judgment Army who had not yet entered the city. Even those who fell and rolled on the ground couldn't extinguish the flames that had caught on them. This was Garcia's alchemical weapon. Zero decided that it was time for her to join the battle. The moment the Wolf King and Garcia stepped onto the deck of their small boat, Zero and Isabella have also arrived. At this moment, there was no need to ask questions to understand that something was amiss. Everyone drew their weapons, leaped off the boat, and charged straight towards the Pure Ones. Isabella then unfolded her power. The stones of God punishment worn by the knights began to vibrate. Zero immediately transformed into a wisp of ghostly light and dove into the body of the Wolf King. Garcia wore an expression of disbelief, unable to fathom how they could use their abilities in front of the stones of God punishment. Zero didn't bother to explain much and rushed towards Garcia. It had been a long time since she had felt such warm sunlight. Garcia stood in the garden, taking a deep breath as the scent of rosemary drifted into her nose with the breeze. This was the Grey Castle. Garcia sat down by the central pond, running her fingers over the stone bricks. Ever since she fell here when she was a child and hit her forehead hard against the edge of the pond, causing her face to be covered in blood, her father had all the bricks removed and replaced with smooth cobblestones. She remembered that Gerald and Timothy were there at the time. Seeing their sister fall, they were all terrified and even imitated her fall one by one, trying to comfort her in order to make her stop crying. Everything seemed to have returned to her childhood. Garcia turned her head and saw a woman in white coming out from behind the flower pond. Zero said she was not a witch, but a pure one. Garcia retorted coldly, saying that all she had was just the ability to create illusions. Suddenly, she picked up a stone and squeezed it hard. The stone did not crumble. Instead, the hard edges cut her skin. She could feel the pain. Zero lifted her skirt slightly and bowed, welcoming Garcia into the spiritual battlefield. Garcia was startled and suddenly felt a heart-wrenching pain coming from her chest. Zero somehow pulled out a long sword from nowhere and stabbed it directly into her chest. Garcia fell to her knees, trembling as she tried to cover the wound. A large amount of blood loss made her consciousness gradually blur. The next moment, she found herself still standing in place, unharmed. Garcia was gasping heavily, not knowing what had happened. The place that had just been pierced still ached faintly. Lowering her head, there was a large pool of blood splattered in a jet pattern under her feet. Zero explained, "This is the basic rule. The consciousness is not immortal, and the pain brought by each death is real. It will consume mental and physical strength, and when this feeling exceeds the range that one can bear, the real eternal sleep will come. Ordinary people can only endure 3 to 4 deaths, while some strong-willed individuals can endure 7 or 8, she finished, then drew a large sword from behind her again and leaped straight up, slashing towards Garcia. The witch, dressed in a white robe, could not possibly hide such a huge weapon. Were those weapons conjured out of thin air? Her words suddenly flashed through Garcia's mind. This is Garcia's own world. The sword fell, but it did not split Garcia in two. Instead, it hit a large iron shield, the huge rebounding force causing Zero to lose her grip on the sword hilt and fall back several steps. Biting her teeth and sneering, Garcia said, "This is my world," and a handbow suddenly appeared in her hand, raised to fire at the enemy. At the same time, a cross rose behind Zero, trapping her firmly. The arrow instantly sank into Zero's abdomen, and she showed a look of pain. This surprised her. Zero didn't expect Garcia to counterattack so quickly. Garcia then conjured a long spear. Garcia raised her long spear, but an unexpected change occurred before she could react, and she suddenly swapped place with Zero. Moments later, Garcia clutched at her own neck and retreated a couple of steps in confusion. Zero had previously absorbed an extraordinary witch, which gained her powerful abilities. She looked at Garcia with a smile and said, "It's my turn now." In her right hand, Garcia held a shield, and in her left, a sword. For the first time, Garcia truly grasped the dreadfulness of an extraordinary witch. Whether it was speed or strength, Garcia felt a crushing pressure. She gave up on defense. In a flash, a ballista materialized before her. She pulled the trigger, but what was fired was not an iron spear, but a black liquid. Zero was drenched in this dark liquid. Garcia tossed a Molotov at Zero, transforming the witch into a pillar of flame. However, the repeated move proved ineffective. Zero was too fast, and the ballista simply couldn't keep up. Garcia had no choice but to rely on traps to hinder Zero, turning the entire garden into a snow powder-filled explosive field. After several bouts of combat, Garcia felt her breathing gradually grow heavy. Beads of slid down her forehead. Waves of dizziness assailed her mind, threatening to topple her over. The reborn Zero did not take advantage of the situation to attack. Instead, she clapped her hands. Garcia's performance had already exceeded her expectations. She went on to explain that although they could alter the terrain and environment in this world with their consciousness, energy consumption was much greater than creating weapons or something out of thin air. She knew Garcia must already be feeling severely weak and tired. Garcia took several deep breaths, showing no signs of giving up. After all, she had already slain Zero many times. Garcia didn't believe Zero could outlast her. Zero shook her head. The church had made many preparations for her, from various knowledge and battle techniques to even feeding her the Judgment Army to enhance her abilities. Knowing they would be sacrificed, the Judgment Army resolutely helped to hone Zero's skills. Zero had once devoured an extraordinary witch before, whose power made her tremble. Zero nearly lost in the spiritual world, but in the end, she defeated her with the demon's weapon and gained all of her powers. Though Zero was unable to truly transform into an extraordinary witch or use the powers of other witches she had consumed, she can be considered invincible in the spiritual battlefield. In the past 2 centuries, she couldn't even remember how many people she had devoured. Garcia didn't understand why Zero would reveal so much. What Zero meant to say was that her consciousness was incredibly potent. If measured by death, she could easily withstand hundreds of deaths. Garcia scoffed, yet she knew her chances were slim. She needed to possess an even more powerful weapon. As if seeing through her thoughts, Zero told Garcia that she couldn't make herself invincible. The legendary weapons from the ancient books she had not experienced could not be created. What she saw and her own knowledge was the key to victory. Garcia planned to fill the entire garden with snow powder, intending to perish together with Zero. Zero looked at Garcia with a pitiful gaze, subsequently summoning a ghastly, terrifying chariot. It was the siege beast that they used to breach the city walls, also known as the weapon from the demons. Garcia's defenses were as fragile as foam. The robust spear shaft directly bypassed the multiple barriers Garcia had set up, tearing her in two with minimal effort. The chariot continued to launch unstoppable spears, and after recovery, the same death was quickly repeated. Garcia didn't even have time to create the snow powder to perish together with her enemy. The continuous agony blurred her consciousness. Cracks appeared in the sky, and her world began to collapse. Zero watched Garcia and told her she had held on for quite a while. She said the final farewell before departure from the spiritual battlefield. Isabella was surprised. She had thought for so long that Zero had failed. Zero had gained Garcia's memories, some of which even surprised her. Isabella asked if she had obtained the method to produce the snow powder, to which Zero nodded, saying the ingredients were simple and commonly found in the workshop. Isabella prepared to hurry back to the Holy City to report to the Pope. Zero nodded again, but Isabella called her back. Was it an illusion? Zero looked the same as before, but why did Isabella feel that there was something different in those light red eyes? Isabella scrutinized Zero for a moment, then shook her head. A grand celebration was taking place in the hall of the border town. All the witches and senior figures were present, toasting and celebrating. Barav also celebrated the upcoming marriage of the Chief Knight Carter to the Western Star, Miss May. Roland raised his glass to welcome Anna and the witch's return. The glasses clinked lightly, and the girl's eyes brimmed with a sweet smile. Lightning suddenly appeared, Roland laughed and said, rewarding her with a cup of fruit wine. As Roland handed her a cup of fruit wine with added ice, she suddenly leaned in and kissed him on the cheek. It was a custom from the fjords. Roland wasn't as surprised as the first time he experienced it. Since it wasn't their first time seeing it, all of the witches didn't find it too strange. However, Sylvie widened her eyes, then looked at Roland with accusing gazes. Ready to call 911. While everyone was enjoying the food, Roland left the hall and came to the castle terrace. Under the gentle night breeze, Roland felt a chill. Half of the autumn had passed. Nightingale appeared from behind him, holding a thin fur coat. She draped it over Roland. Roland smiled, looking at his own territory. Nightingale pointed in the direction of the brightly lit square. The town was getting more and more lively. Nightingale remembered the first time she snuck into the town. It was a place of utter desolation. But now, standing here, she could feel the joy of the townspeople. Roland looked up at the cloudless, bright night sky, taking a deep breath. He still had a lot to do: expand the scope of education, establish public healthcare, strengthen cultural construction, and encourage childbirth. Looking at Roland's back, Lightning quietly stuffed some food into her bag, only to be caught by Maisie. Lightning pulled Maisie into a corner of the hall and told her that she planned to go exploring tomorrow. She asked if Maisie would like to come along. Without a second thought, Maisie agreed. Lightning and Maisie quickly discussed what they would need to prepare for tomorrow. They shouldn't bring a bag full of food like last time. Maisie patted her chest, saying she understood. As they prepared to leave, Lightning stopped her again, reminding her that this was a secret and they couldn't tell anyone else. Early the next morning, the two set off. Lightning had traversed this journey many times in her memory, so much so that she could find the right direction even with her eyes closed. Their goal was to explore an ancient ruin, a stone tower that was left behind over 400 years ago. Lightning said that if they could bring the ancient books inside the tower to His Highness, he would reward them with lots of food and chicken eggs. This instantly perked Maisie up. The stone tower, half covered with vines and moss, still stood in the forest. Everything around it looked the same as it had several months ago, with no changes. Lightning descended and circled the tower to confirm it was safe before landing gently. Lightning made a shushing gesture, saying that there might be demons here. Immediately, Maisie's tail stood straight up. Although the bombing was successful and did not disappoint His Highness, Lightning found that her flying was no longer as agile as it once was. It was as if there was always a demon chasing her from behind. This was an obstacle brought about by fear. Lightning recited her father's teachings to herself in her heart. She had to overcome this, or she feared she might never be able to fly freely again. This was also why she decided to act on her own without informing His Highness Roland. Perhaps His Highness would scold her later, confiscate her ice cream, and the Sisters of the Witch Union would worry, but she was determined. As the daughter of the greatest explorer of the fjords, Thunder, Lightning could not accept a cowardly version of herself. This time, she brought a pistol and took Maisie along. Lightning pointed at the top of the broken tower, saying that she would go up to check the situation first and asked Maisie to be careful. The little girl kept encouraging herself in her heart as she walked down the stairs step by step. As she reached the corner of the hallway, she peeked around quietly. The collapsed wooden door was shattered, and there was no sign of the devil at the entrance to the basement. At this moment, she heard a faint voice floating from the darkness. It was hardly audible, but it was extremely familiar. Lightning shivered involuntarily and nearly turned around to run away in panic. She gritted her teeth, suppressing the fear that welled up in her heart. This time, the calling sound was much clearer, and the tone was exactly the same as last time. It kept repeating, "Help me!